3 missed calls. That is the price of a human life. While Julian Thorne was busy turning off his phone to enjoy a night of illicit passion in a 5-star hotel suite, his 6-year-old son was fighting for every single breath in the back of an ambulance. Julian thought he could play the game, keep the devoted wife, the wealthy father-in-law, and the secret mistress all perfectly balanced. But he made one fatal calculation. He underestimated who his wife's father really was. When the truth comes out, and it always does, it won't just be a divorce. It will be an annihilation. This is the story of how a single night of pleasure destroyed a man's entire existence. The notification light on the iPhone blinked once, a silent, frantic pulse in the dim light of room 402 at the Ritz-Carlton. Julian Thorne didn't look at it. He was too busy tracing the rim of a crystal champagne flute, smiling at the woman sitting across from him. Vanessa Rourke. She was everything his life at home wasn't: spontaneous, dangerous, and demanding of nothing but his attention. She wore a silk robe that slipped just off her shoulder, her dark eyes fixed on him with a predatory adoration. "You promised you'd turn it off," Vanessa whispered, her voice like velvet. She nodded toward the phone on the mahogany nightstand. "No work? No wife? Just us?" Julian glanced at the device. The screen lit up again. Claire Mobile flashed across the display. He felt a momentary twinge of annoyance. Claire. His wife of 8 years. She was probably calling to ask if he had remembered to pick up the dry cleaning, or perhaps Toby was refusing to eat his vegetables again. It was domestic drudgery, the very thing he was paying $600 a night to escape. "Just let me silence it completely," Julian said, his voice smooth. He picked up the phone. It vibrated in his hand, a desperate buzz. He didn't slide to answer. He didn't check the voicemail. He held the power button and the volume button simultaneously until the screen went black. "There," he said, tossing it onto the duvet. "Gone." Vanessa smiled, satisfied. "Good. Now pour me another glass." 5 miles away, the world was ending. Claire Thorne was not calling about vegetables. She was screaming at a frantic pace down I-95, one hand gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckle force, the other clutching her phone, hitting redial for the 4th time. "Pick up, pick up, pick up, damn you, Julian," she sobbed. In the back seat, the wheezing was terrifying. It sounded like a rusty saw cutting through wet wood. Toby, their 6-year-old son, was thrashing against his seatbelt, his face turning a terrifying shade of gray. "Mommy!" Toby gasped, the sound barely audible. "Can't breathe!" "I know, baby. I know. We're almost there. Daddy isn't answering, but Mommy is here," Claire screamed, swerving around a slow-moving truck. It had happened so fast. A severe allergic reaction to a mislabeled bakery cookie at a school fundraiser. The EpiPen had jammed a 1 in a million defect, and by the time they got into the car, Toby's throat was closing up. Claire hit redial again. "The person you are trying to reach is unavailable." The automated voice felt like a slap in the face. Where was he? Julian had said he was working late on the Merriweather account. He should be at the office. He should be at his desk. Why was his phone off? Claire tore into the emergency bay of St. Jude's Hospital, screeching the tires. She didn't wait for a nurse. She scooped Toby up, he was dead weight now, his head lolling back, and ran. "Help somebody help my son!" The next hour was a blur of white coats, shouting voices, and the ripping of Velcro. Claire stood in the corner of the trauma room, her hands pressed over her mouth, her phone still clutched in her trembling grip. She texted Julian, "Emergency." "St. Jude's. Toby dying. Pick up." Nothing. The message didn't even deliver. A doctor with kind, tired eyes approached her. Dr. Evans. He pulled down his mask. The room behind him was suddenly very quiet. The chaotic beeping of machines had stopped. Mrs. Thorne. Where is he? Claire whispered. Is he okay? Dr. Evans placed a hand on her shoulder. We did everything we could. The anaphylaxis caused a cardiac arrest. His airway was obstructed for too long. Claire shook her head. No, he's 6. He just started T-ball. I'm so sorry, Dr. Evans said softly. Toby is gone. Claire didn't scream. Not yet. She just looked down at her phone. At the dark screen. At the timestamp of her last call to Julian. 8:42 p.m. The exact moment Toby's heart had stopped. Julian had been unavailable. It was 2:00 a.m. when Julian Thorne pulled his BMW into the driveway of their colonial-style home in Greenwich. He felt relaxed, the tension of the work week worked out of his muscles. Vanessa had been exceptional tonight. He checked his phone as he walked up the path. He turned it back on, expecting a barrage of nagging texts. Instead, the phone flooded. 27 missed calls. 14 texts. Not just from Claire, from his mother-in-law, from the hospital. And one from a number he recognized with a cold dread, Silas Sterling. Claire's father. Julian stood on the front porch, the key hovering over the lock. The silence of the house was heavy. It wasn't the silence of sleep. It was the silence of a tomb. He opened the door. The lights were all on. Sitting in the living room armchair, still wearing her coat, was Claire. She was staring at the unlit fireplace. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together wrong. Standing by the window, looking out into the darkness, was a man in a dark charcoal suit. He leaned on a cane made of polished ebony. Silas Sterling. The man was a legend in the corporate world, not as a CEO, but as a fixer. He was a forensic auditor who had brought down senators and bank directors. He didn't yell. He didn't make threats. He simply found the one loose thread in a person's life and pulled until they unraveled. Claire, Julian asked, his voice trembling slightly. I saw the calls. My phone died. The charger was in the office, and... Claire didn't blink. She didn't look at him. Silas turned around slowly. His face was unreadable, a mask of aged granite. Your phone died, Julian? Yes. Julian lied, the fabrication coming easily. I was at the office. The Merriweather file. I lost track of time and the battery drained. What's going on? Is Toby sick? Silas walked forward, the cane tapping rhythmically on the hardwood floor. Tap, tap, tap. Toby isn't sick, Julian. Toby is dead. The world dropped out from under Julian. What? He died 4 hours ago. Silas said, his voice devoid of emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. An allergic reaction. Claire called you. Claire called. She called you while he was gasping for air. She called you while the doctors cut his clothes off. She called you when they called the time of death. No. Julian fell to his knees, a performance of grief that was half real, half panic. No, oh God, no, my boy. He reached for Claire. Don't touch me, Claire said. Her voice was raspy. She finally turned her head to look at him. Her eyes were dry. She had cried all her tears at the hospital. Now there was only a cold, hollow void. Where were you? I told you. Julian pleaded, tears streaming down his face. I was at the office. I didn't know if I had known. The office, Silas repeated. He pulled a silver pocket watch from his vest, checked it, and snapped it shut. "You were at the Sterling Cooper downtown branch?" "Yes, I was alone. I locked up." Silas stared at him. He didn't say, "I know you're lying." He didn't scream, "Liar." He just stared, analyzing Julian like a bug under a microscope. Silas knew the security protocols of that building better than anyone. He owned the security firm that guarded it. "We have to go to the funeral home tomorrow," Silas said, dismissing Julian's outburst. "Go upstairs. Shower. You smell like—" Silas sniffed the air, his nostrils flaring slightly. Hibiscus and stale champagne. Not the smell of a late night at the office. Julian froze. Vanessa wore a perfume called Hibiscus Night. "I had a drink with the client to celebrate finishing the brief," Julian stammered, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Silas walked past him, stopping right at his ear. "My grandson is dead, Julian. If I find out that you were anywhere other than where you say you were, God will not be able to help you. Because he won't get to you before I do." Silas walked out the front door, closing it softly. Julian remained on his knees, shaking. He looked at Claire, but she had already stood up and was walking up the stairs like a ghost. "Claire, please," he whispered. "Sleep in the guest room," she said without looking back. "I can't look at you." As Julian sat there in the empty living room, he pulled his phone out. He hastily deleted the call log. He deleted the texts from Vanessa. "Did you get home safe, lover? 3 delete." He thought he was safe. He thought he had covered his tracks. But he had forgotten one thing. Silas Sterling didn't need a phone to find the truth. Silas Sterling was the kind of man who could read the history of a room just by standing in it. And tonight, he had smelled another woman on his son-in-law, while his daughter smelled of hospital antiseptic. The funeral was set for 3 days later, and those 3 days would be the longest of Julian's life. But the real horror hadn't even started yet. The day of Toby Thorne's funeral was painted in shades of slate gray. A relentless drizzle fell over the cemetery in Greenwich, turning the manicured grass into a slick, muddy carpet. Julian stood next to Claire under a large black umbrella. He was wearing his best suit, a bespoke Tom Ford that cost $4,000. He wore dark sunglasses not to block the sun, but to hide the fact that his eyes weren't red enough. He had practiced his expression in the mirror that morning, a furrowed brow, a tight jaw, the look of a man holding back an ocean of grief. People whispered as they walked past. "Poor Julian. He looks broken. He was working late to provide for them, and now this." Julian absorbed the sympathy like a drug. It was working. The narrative was holding. He was the hard-working father who had been tragically absent, not the adulterous husband who had ignored the call. Claire, however, was statue still. She hadn't spoken to him since the night she returned from the hospital. She stood by the small white casket, her hand resting on the cold wood. She looked frail, her skin translucent against her black dress. Silas Sterling stood 10 feet back. He wasn't under an umbrella. He let the rain hit his face, water dripping from the brim of his hat. He wasn't looking at the coffin. He was scanning the perimeter. Silas had spent 40 years destroying fraudulent companies and corrupt CEOs. He knew that criminals driven by narcissism often returned to the scene of the crime. Or in this case, the scene of the consequence. His eyes narrowed. Across the cemetery, parked on the access road behind a line of oak trees, was a red Mercedes C-Class. The windows were tinted, but the driver's side window was cracked open an inch. A plume of cigarette smoke drifted out. Silas tapped the shoulder of the man beside him, Kyle, his head of security and personal investigator. Kyle was a former intelligence operative, a man who existed in the shadows. "The red Mercedes." Silas murmured, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Get the plate. Find out who is watching my grandson's burial." "Already on it, sir," Cale replied, glancing at his tablet. "Registered to a Vanessa Rourke. 28, Marketing Director at Horizon Media." Silas stored the name in his mind like a loaded bullet. Vanessa Rourke. As the priest finished the final prayer, "Earth to earth, ashes to ashes," Julian stepped forward to place a single white rose on the casket. He sobbed a loud, ragged sound that made the attendees bow their heads in respect. But Silas saw what others didn't. As Julian wiped his eyes, his hand drifted to his pocket. He checked his phone. A quick, tactile reassurance. He was nervous. After the service, the wake was held at the Thorne residence. The house was filled with casseroles, flowers, and hushed conversations. Julian played the host, perfectly accepting condolences with a tragic nod. "If I had just left work an hour earlier," Julian said to a group of Claire's aunts, his voice breaking. "If I hadn't been so focused on that merger." "You couldn't have known, Julian," Aunt Martha soothed, patting his arm. "You were providing for your family." From the corner of the room, Silas watched. He held a glass of scotch that he hadn't touched. He waited until the crowd thinned, then he walked into Julian's home office. He didn't turn on the light. He walked to the desk. He didn't hack the computer. That was too messy. Instead, he looked at the physical evidence. On the desk sat a parking validation stub. Julian was sloppy. Grief or the performance of it made people careless. Silas picked up the stub. It wasn't from the Sterling Cooper office garage. The office garage used a keycard system that didn't issue paper stubs for employees. This was a thermal paper ticket. "Valet, the Ritz-Carlton Westchester. Check-in 6:15 p.m. Check-out 1:45 a.m. Silas's grip on the glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. The timeline. Check-in at 6:15 p.m. Toby went into shock at 8:30 p.m. Julian wasn't at the office. He was at a hotel. Silas slipped the stub into his pocket. He walked out of the office and found Claire sitting in the kitchen, staring blankly at an untouched plate of food. "He's lying, isn't he?" Claire asked softly. She didn't look up. Silas pulled a chair out and sat opposite her. "Yes." "He said he was at the office," Claire said, her voice trembling with a rage she was too exhausted to express physically. "But his clothes, he smelled like her. I don't know who she is, Dad, but I know he wasn't working." Silas reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. "I found a valet ticket from the Ritz-Carlton in his office, from that night." Claire's head snapped up. The sorrow in her eyes vanished, replaced by a sharp, icy hatred. "He was at a hotel while Toby was dying." "Yes." "I want to kill him," she whispered. "I want to scream it to everyone in the other room. I want to destroy him." "No," Silas said firmly. "You will do no such thing. Not yet." "Why?" "He let our son die." "Because," Silas said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register, "if you scream now, he gets a divorce. He gets half the assets. He moves on. He plays the victim. He spins a story that grief drove you crazy." Silas stood up, looming over the table like a dark judgment. "We don't just want him gone, Claire. We want him erased. We want to take his reputation, his money, his future, and his freedom. We are going to let him think he got away with it. We are going to let him get comfortable. And then when he is at his highest point, we are going to cut the string." Claire wiped a tear from her cheek. She took a deep breath. "What do I do?" "You play the grieving widow," Silas instructed. "You let him comfort you. You let him think he's safe. Leave the rest to me. 2 weeks passed. The sharp edge of grief began to dull into a heavy, aching throb for Claire. But for Julian, life was returning to normal with alarming speed. He believed the storm had passed. Claire was quiet, docile even. Silas had stopped coming by the house every day. Julian convinced himself that his lie about the office had worked. After all, who would question a grieving father? On a Tuesday morning, Julian drove to his office at Sterling Cooper Financial. He was up for a promotion to senior partner, a position that came with a $500,000 salary bump and a seat on the board. He felt he deserved it. The tragedy with Toby had actually garnered him sympathy from the senior partners. They looked at him with softer eyes. He closed his office door and immediately dialed Vanessa. "I missed you," he whispered. "I was at the funeral," Vanessa said, her voice pouty. "I saw you with her. You held her hand." "I had to, Ness. It's for appearances. She's a wreck. Once the dust settles, I'll ask for a separation. I just need to secure this promotion first. Silas is the chairman of the board, but he's semi-retired. If I get the senior partner role, I'll have my own leverage." "I hate waiting," Vanessa sighed. "Meet me the usual place. Lunch." "I can't today. Too risky. But soon." Julian hung up, feeling in control. Across town, in a building that looked like a fortress of glass and steel, Silas Sterling sat in a room surrounded by monitors. This was the headquarters of his private consulting firm. "Report," Silas said. Cale stepped forward, projecting an image onto the main screen. It was a timeline. "We have everything, sir. I spoke to the shift manager at the Ritz-Carlton. A little donation to their security upgrade fund went a long way. We have the footage." On the screen, a grainy black and white video played. Timestamp 8:40 p.m. 2 minutes before Toby died. The video showed the hallway of the 4th floor. A waiter was delivering a tray of champagne and oysters to room 402. The door opened. Julian Thorne stood there, wearing a hotel robe, laughing. He took the tray. Behind him, Vanessa Rourke walked by, wearing lingerie. "We also pulled the cell tower data," Cale continued. At 8:42 p.m., when Claire called him for the 3rd time, his phone pinged the tower nearest the hotel. Then it went dead, manually powered down. Silas stared at the screen. He turned it off. He didn't just miss the call. He saw it ringing and turned it off. "Correct," Cale said. "We also did a deep dive into his financials. He's been siphoning money from the joint account he shares with Claire to pay for gifts for Ms. Rourke. Cartier bracelets the hotel rooms, a lease on her Mercedes. It's all there. But," Cale paused, "there's something else." "Go on." "Julian has been cooking the books on the Merriweather account. He's been inflating the projected returns to boost his quarterly bonuses. It's subtle, but it's fraud. If this comes out, he doesn't just lose his job. He goes to federal prison." Silas leaned back in his leather chair. A cruel, satisfied smile touched his lips. "He thinks he's getting a promotion on Friday," Silas said. "Is he?" Cale asked. "Oh yes," Silas said. "We are going to let him believe he has won the world. I want him to stand on the podium. I want him to taste the victory. And then I want to watch him choke on it." Silas picked up his phone and dialed the current CEO of Sterling Cooper, a man named Arthur. "Arthur, it's Silas." "Silas, good to hear from you. How is the family holding up?" "We are managing," Silas said smoothly. "Listen, regarding the senior partner decision on Friday, I've been thinking. Julian, he needs a win. He needs something to focus on after the loss of his son. I think we should announce it at the quarterly board meeting. Make a spectacle of it. Invite the press. Stream it to the regional offices. Let's honor his resilience." "That's a wonderful idea, Silas," Arthur agreed. "We'll set it up. A big celebration." "Perfect," Silas said. "I'll be there personally to present it." He hung up. The trap wasn't just set, it was baited with poison. Friday arrived with a bright, mocking sunshine. The Sterling Cooper headquarters was buzzing. The quarterly board meeting was usually a dry affair, but today rumors were flying that Julian Thorne was being crowned the new prince of the firm. Julian dressed with meticulous care. He wore a navy blue suit, a crisp white shirt, and a tie that Toby had given him for Father's Day the year before. He wore it not out of sentiment, but because he knew it would play well with the board. The grieving father soldiering on. He arrived at the boardroom on the top floor. The room was massive with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. 50 people were present, the board of directors, key stakeholders, and senior management. A video crew was setting up to live stream the event to the company's 3,000 employees worldwide. Julian took his seat near the head of the table. He felt a vibration in his pocket. A text from Vanessa. "Good luck, baby. Celebrate tonight, 3." He smiled discreetly and texted back, "Champagne is on ice." Arthur, the CEO, stood up at the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. It has been a challenging quarter, but also one of triumph. Today we want to honor a man who has shown incredible fortitude." Arthur gestured to Julian. "Julian, please come up here." Julian stood up. Applause broke out. He walked to the front, shaking hands, feigning humility. "Julian has led the Merriweather account to record highs," Arthur said. "And despite a personal tragedy that would have broken a lesser man, he has remained dedicated to this firm. It is my honor to announce his promotion to senior partner." The applause grew louder. Julian stepped to the microphone. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. This is for my son, Toby. I know he's watching down on me." From the back of the room, a cane tapped against the floor. Tap, tap, tap. The sound cut through the applause like a knife. The room went silent. Silas Sterling stood up from the shadows in the back corner. He walked slowly toward the front. "Silas," Arthur said, smiling. "I didn't know you'd be speaking." "I have a few words to add," Silas said. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made the air in the room feel heavy. Julian felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine. He hadn't expected Silas to be here. Silas reached the podium. He didn't look at the audience. He looked directly at Julian. "You say Toby is watching down on you, Julian." "Yes, Silas," Julian said, forcing a smile. "I wonder what he sees," Silas mused. He pulled a USB drive from his pocket and plugged it into the presentation laptop connected to the massive screen behind them. "We were going to review the Merriweather growth charts," Silas said to the room. "But in the spirit of transparency, a core value of this company, I think we should review the actual cost of Julian's dedication." The screen flickered. The corporate logo disappeared. In its place appeared a scanned document. A bank statement. "This," Silas said, pointing with his cane, "is the company expense account assigned to Julian. Note the entries. The Ritz-Carlton, Tiffany's, Victoria's Secret. Unless the Merriweather client has started wearing lace lingerie, I believe these are misappropriations." A murmur rippled through the room. Julian's face went pale. "Silas, there must be a mistake. We can discuss this in private." "Sit down," Silas barked. The command was so authoritative that Julian actually took a step back. "But money is just money," Silas continued. "Let's talk about time. The night my grandson died." The screen changed. It was the video footage from the Ritz-Carlton hallway. The timestamp was large and read 8:40 p.m. The entire boardroom watched in stunned silence as Julian, in his robe, kissed Vanessa Rourke in the doorway. "At this exact moment," Silas narrated, his voice turning to ice, "my daughter was calling you. Toby was in the back of the car, suffocating. His throat was closing. He was crying for his father. Silas clicked a remote. An image of Julian's phone records appeared. 8:42 p.m. Power down. You didn't miss the call, Julian. You silenced it. You chose your mistress over your dying son. The room was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Julian looked around, panic rising in his throat. The board members were looking at him with pure disgust. Arthur looked like he was going to be sick. "That's a lie," Julian shouted, desperation taking over. "That video is doctored. This is a setup." "Is it?" Silas asked. "Then perhaps we should discuss the Merriweather account." The screen changed again. This time it was a complex spreadsheet with red highlights. "You committed securities fraud, Julian. You inflated the assets by 40% to trigger your bonus clauses. I've already sent this file to the SEC and the district attorney." Silas leaned into the microphone. "You aren't being promoted, Julian. You are being terminated, and the police are waiting in the lobby." Julian backed away, his hands shaking. "You can't do this. I built this department." "You built a house of cards," Silas said. "And I just blew it down." Two uniformed officers entered the back of the room. Julian looked for an exit, but there was none. The live stream was still running. 3,000 employees were watching him unravel in real time. As the officers cuffed Julian's hands behind his back, Silas leaned in close, so only Julian could hear. "This is just the beginning, Julian. You took my grandson's future. I'm taking your past, your present, and your future. Enjoy prison. I hear the food is worse than the Ritz." Julian was dragged out of the boardroom, screaming that he was innocent, that it was a mistake. Silas stood at the podium, adjusted his cufflinks, and looked at the stunned board members. "Now," Silas said calmly, "does anyone else have any hidden liabilities I should know about?" The fall of Julian Thorne was not a slow decline. It was a free fall from the stratosphere without a parachute. He was denied bail. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Hemlock, who unbeknownst to Julian had attended law school with Silas Sterling, deemed him an extreme flight risk, given the millions he had embezzled and his demonstrated lack of moral tethers. Julian was traded from his Italian silk suits to an orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. He spent his days in a 6x8 cell at the county lockup, his mind replaying the boardroom disaster on a loop. He had lost everything in 17 minutes. But Silas Sterling wasn't finished. He had destroyed the architect. Now it was time to demolish the accessory. Vanessa Rourke had watched the live stream of the board meeting from her office at Horizon Media. When Julian's infidelity and fraud were exposed, she didn't feel fear for him. She felt an icy panic for herself. The gravy train had just derailed in spectacular fashion. She immediately tried to distance herself. She deleted her social media. She called her landlord to see if she could break the lease on her luxury apartment which Julian paid for. She called the dealership about the Mercedes which Julian paid for. 2 days after Julian's arrest, Vanessa walked into her office to find a cardboard box on her desk. Her boss Marcus was waiting for her. He held up a tablet. On the screen was a still image from the Ritz-Carlton security footage, the kiss in the hallway while a child was dying. "Horizon Media is a family-oriented brand, Vanessa," Marcus said coldly. This is radioactive. The board has already seen it. You're done. Security will escort you out." "You can't fire me for my private life," Vanessa shrilled, her composure cracking. "We aren't," Marcus said. We are firing you for corporate espionage. It seems you used your relationship with Julian Thorne to gain insider information on Sterling Cooper's marketing strategies. Vanessa's jaw dropped. It was a lie, a fabrication planted by Silas's team, but it was unprovable in the short term. It was enough to blackball her from the industry forever. Stripped of her job, her car repossessed, and eviction looming. Vanessa grew desperate. She did the only thing she could think of. She reached out to the victim. She sent an email to Claire. The subject line read, "Understanding the Truth." Claire showed the email to Silas over dinner. Silas read it and chuckled darkly. "The rat is cornered. She wants to cut a deal. She wants to tell you that it was all Julian's idea, that she was a victim of his charm." "I want to see her," Claire said. Her voice was stronger now, the hollow grief hardening into a steely resolve. "Are you sure?" Silas asked. "Yes. I need her to look me in the eye." The meeting took place in a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop 3 towns over. Silas sat at a corner table watching his security detail just outside. Claire sat waiting. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes late, trying to look humble in jeans and a sweater, but the designer handbag she carried gave away her priorities. She looked tired. The glow of being the chosen one had faded, leaving behind a frightened, selfish woman. Vanessa sat down. "Claire, thank you for meeting me. I don't know what to say about Toby. It's a tragedy." "Don't say his name," Claire said, her voice perfectly level. Vanessa flinched. "Okay. Look, I didn't know. Julian told me you two were practically separated. He said it was a loveless marriage. If I had known about the emergency that night, I would have made him leave." Claire stared at her. She remembered the phone logs Silas had shown her. "You're lying," Claire said. "What?" Silas pulled the data from Julian's phone, Claire explained calmly. "When I called the first 2 times, Julian let it ring. When I called the 3rd time at 8:42 p.m., the exact minute my son's heart stopped, you were the one holding his phone. His fingerprints weren't on the power button for that shutdown. Yours were." Vanessa went pale. We were busy. I just wanted the noise to stop." Claire leaned forward. "You wanted the noise to stop. My son was the noise. You didn't just sleep with my husband, Vanessa. You actively prevented him from saving our child." "Julian is the monster here," Vanessa pleaded, her voice rising. "He lied to both of us, Claire. I'm ruined. I have nothing. He used me." Claire stood up, disgusted. "He didn't use you. You two deserve each other. And don't worry about being ruined, Vanessa. My father hasn't even started on you yet. By the time the IRS is done auditing the gifts Julian gave you with stolen money, you'll be lucky to get a job scrubbing floors." Claire walked away, leaving Vanessa shivering in the warm coffee shop. It wasn't satisfaction Claire felt, but a necessary cleansing. The toxicity had to be purged. The trial of Julian Thorne was not merely a legal proceeding. It was a public evisceration. By the time the trial began, 3 months after his arrest, the media had christened it the Ritz-Carlton betrayal. The narrative was irresistible to the public, a wealthy, arrogant finance executive, sipping vintage champagne and shutting off his phone while his 6-year-old son suffocated in the back of a sedan. The public didn't just want a conviction. They wanted a sacrifice. The courthouse in Greenwich was besieged. Satellite trucks lined the streets, their cables snaking over the wet pavement like black vipers. When the prisoner transport van arrived, the crowd surged forward, screaming insults that the thick steel walls could barely muffle. Inside Department 4 of the Superior Court smelled of lemon polish and nervous sweat. Julian Thorne sat at the defense table, a shadow of the man he had been. The Italian silk suits were gone, replaced by a drab, ill-fitting gray suit provided by his public defender. His assets had been frozen so quickly and completely by Silas Sterling's legal team that Julian couldn't even afford a private attorney. He looked gaunt, his skin sallow, his eyes darting around the room, desperate to make eye contact with anyone who might offer a shred of sympathy. He found none. In the front row, sitting with the posture of royalty, were Claire and Silas. Claire wore black, her face hidden behind dark, oversized sunglasses, though she removed them when the judge entered. Silas sat like a stone golem, his hands resting on the head of his cane, his eyes fixed on the back of Julian's neck. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He simply waited. The presiding judge was the Honorable Evelyn Hemlock, a jurist known in legal circles as the Hammer. She had no patience for white-collar criminals who thought their net worth was a get-out-of-jail-free card. The prosecution's dismantling. The first week of the trial was a master class in forensic accounting. The district attorney, a sharp-witted man named Mr. Danton, didn't start with the death of the child. He started with the greed. Danton projected spreadsheets onto the massive courtroom screens. He walked the jury through the labyrinth of Julian's fraud. "Ladies and gentlemen," Danton said, pacing in front of the jury box. "Mr. Thorne didn't just cook the books. He burned the kitchen down. He inflated the Merriweather assets by 40%. Why to trigger a bonus clause? A bonus he intended to spend on a life he was building apart from his family." The jury saw the receipts. The $800 dinners. The diamond bracelet from Cartier. The lease on the Mercedes. Every charge was a nail in Julian's coffin. But the financial crimes were just the kindling. The fire came when they called the character witnesses. Or rather, the witness to his character's absolute rot. The star witness. On the fifth day, a hush fell over the courtroom as the bailiff opened the side door. The prosecution calls Vanessa Rourke. Julian flinched physically, as if he had been struck. He hadn't seen Vanessa since the night of the arrest. She looked wrecked. The glamorous mistress in the silk robe was gone. In her place was a woman wearing a cheap cardigan, her hair pulled back in a severe, messy bun, her face devoid of makeup. She looked older, harder, and terrified. She had been granted limited immunity regarding the stolen goods in exchange for her testimony, but her reputation was incinerated. She would never work in marketing again. She was there to save her own skin, and Julian knew it. Vanessa took the stand, refusing to look at the defense table. "Ms. Rourke," Danton began softly, "can you tell the court where you were on the night of November 20th? "I was at the Ritz-Carlton, Westchester," she whispered. "Speak up, please," Judge Hemlock instructed. "I was at the Ritz-Carlton," Vanessa repeated, her voice shaking. "Room 402. "And who were you with?" "Julian Thorne." "What was the nature of your meeting?" "It was a romantic encounter. We were celebrating." "Celebrating what?" Danton pressed. "He told me he had handled his wife, that she wouldn't be bothering us. He said he was going to be promoted soon and then he would leave her." Claire, sitting in the gallery, didn't react. She had already processed the betrayal. Now she was just watching the autopsy of her marriage. Danton walked to the evidence table and picked up a clear plastic bag containing Julian's iPhone. "Ms. Rourke, at approximately 8:40 p.m., did something happen to disrupt your celebration?" Vanessa closed her eyes. A tear leaked out. "Yes. His phone rang. It was on the nightstand." "Did you see who was calling?" "Yes, the screen said Claire, mobile." "And what did Mr. Thorne do?" Vanessa took a shaky breath. The courtroom was silent enough to hear the hum of the air conditioning. "He laughed," she said. "He looked at the phone and laughed. He said, 'She's probably calling to ask where the remote is. She's helpless without me." A low murmur of disgust rippled through the jury. Julian's lawyer put a hand on Julian's arm to keep him from reacting, but Julian was shaking his head, mouthing, No, that's not true." "Did he answer it?" Danton asked. "No. He let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then it rang again immediately, and a third time. And then, I told him it was annoying," Vanessa sobbed. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I told him it was killing the mood. I told him to turn it off." "And did he picked it up?" Vanessa said, her voice dropping to a haunt. "He looked at the screen one last time. It was ringing. He pressed the buttons on the side. He held them down until the screen went black. Then he tossed it onto the duvet and poured more champagne. He said, problem solved." "Problem solved," Danton repeated. He let the words hang in the air like smoke. At that exact moment, 8:42 p.m., Toby Thorne went into cardiac arrest. Objection. Julian's lawyer stood up, though his heart clearly wasn't in it. Prejudicial. Overruled, Judge Hemlock snapped. The timeline is factual. Vanessa was dismissed. As she walked past the defense table, Julian whispered, "You traitor." She didn't stop. She didn't look back. She walked out of the courtroom and out of his life, leaving him alone in the wreckage they had created together. The verdict and the sword. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They didn't need lunch. They needed to wash their hands of Julian Thorne. When the foreman stood up, Julian gripped the table so hard his knuckles turned white. On the count of wire fraud, we find the defendant Julian Thorne guilty. On the count of securities fraud, 14 counts guilty. On the count of grand larceny guilty. It was a clean sweep. The sentencing hearing was set for 2 days later. This was the moment Silas had been waiting for. He had prepared a victim impact statement, but at the last minute, he chose not to read it. He didn't need to speak. The silence of the empty seat at his dinner table spoke louder than any words. Judge Hemlock shuffled her papers and looked down at Julian over the rim of her spectacles. The courtroom was packed. "Mr. Thorne, please stand." Julian stood. His legs felt like water. "In my 20 years on the bench..." Judge Hemlock began, her voice resonating with a terrifying calm. "I have seen murderers, gang leaders, and violent offenders, but rarely have I seen a man so completely hollowed out by his own narcissism." She took off her glasses. "You are not being sentenced for the death of your son. That is a burden your conscience must carry, assuming you can find it. You are being sentenced for the systemic theft of millions of dollars. However, the law allows me to consider your character when determining the severity of your punishment within the guidelines." She leaned forward. "You stole from your partners. You stole from your wife. You stole from the shareholders. You lived a lie wrapped in silk paid for by the labor of others. You have shown zero remorse, only self-pity. You are a danger to society not because you are violent, but because you are a parasite." "Your Honor, please," Julian croaked, tears streaming down his face. "I lost my son, too." "You did not lose him." Hemlock cut him off, her voice like a whip crack. "You ignored him. There is a difference. I sentence you to the maximum penalty allowed by federal statutes. 25 years in a federal penitentiary. You will not be eligible for parole for 20 years. Furthermore, I am ordering full restitution. Your accounts, your future earnings, and your pension are hereby seized and awarded to the victims of your fraud." She banged the gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. "Take him away." The gray box. 6 months later. Otisville Federal Correctional Institution was a bleak facility in upstate New York. It was a place of gray concrete, gray skies, and gray men. Julian Thorne was now inmate 89402. The first 6 months had been a brutal awakening. He was not in a country club prison. Because of the high-profile nature of his case and the amount of money stolen, he was in medium security. He worked in the laundry folding rough sheets for 12 cents an hour. His hands, once manicured and soft, were chapped and raw. He had no friends inside. The other inmates knew his story. Prisoners have a code, and crimes involving children even indirectly made you a pariah. He ate alone. He walked the yard alone. On a Tuesday afternoon, a guard banged on his cell bars. "Thorne, visitation." Julian's heart leaped. He had not had a single visitor. His parents had passed years ago. His friends from the finance world had erased his number. He was marched down the long, echoing corridor to the visitation block. He was placed in a booth with a thick plexiglass divider. He sat down and waited. The door on the other side opened. Silas Sterling walked in, followed by Claire. Julian gasped. He almost didn't recognize Claire. She looked healthy. She had cut her hair into a sharp bob. She wore a cream-colored coat. She didn't look like a grieving widow. She looked like a woman who had survived a war. Silas looked exactly the same. Timeless. Indestructible. They sat down. Julian picked up the black phone receiver. Claire picked up hers. "Claire." Julian breathed, his voice cracking. "Oh God, Claire, you came." Claire stared at him. Her eyes were dry. "Hello, Julian." "Claire, you have to get me out of here." Julian began, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "It's hell in here. I'm scared. I can't do 25 years. Please, Silas has connections. You can appeal. I'll sign anything. I'll give up all rights to everything. Just please." He stopped. Claire wasn't looking at him with pity. She was looking at him with the detached curiosity one might have for a bug trapped in a jar. "We didn't come here to help you, Julian," Claire said calmly. "We came to close the account." "Close the account? What are you talking about? We're family." "We were never family," Silas interrupted, leaning toward his microphone. His voice came through the receiver, tinny but sharp. "You were an investment that went bad. A liability." "Silas, I'm the father of your grandson." "You were a sperm donor," Silas corrected. "A father protects. A father answers the phone." Julian slammed his fist against the glass. "I didn't know. How many times do I have to say it? I didn't know he was dying." "And that is why you are here," Claire said. "Because you didn't care enough to find out." She reached into her purse and pulled out a document. She held it up to the glass. "This is the divorce decree. It was finalized this morning. You didn't contest it because your court-appointed lawyer couldn't find you to sign the papers, so the judge granted a default judgment. I have my maiden name back. I am Claire Sterling again." "Claire, don't do this." "It's done," she said. She put the paper away. "And there's one more thing." She pulled out a photo. It was a picture of a headstone. Toby Thorne, 2019, 2025. Safe in the arms of the angels. "I visit him every Sunday," Claire said. "I tell him stories. I told him that the bad man can't hurt us anymore." "The bad man." Julian wept. "I loved him. You loved yourself," Claire said. "And Toby was just an accessory to your ego. Just like me, just like Vanessa." "Vanessa," Julian muttered. "Is she—" "She's working as a cashier at a grocery store in Ohio," Silas said with a grim smile. "We made sure her reputation preceded her in New York. She's living the life she deserves. And now so are you." Silas checked his watch, a Patek Philippe, that cost more than the building they were sitting in. "Our time is up, Julian. We won't be coming back. No one will. You are going to rot in this box, and the world is going to forget you ever existed. That is the true revenge. Not pain, obscurity. Silas stood up. Come, Claire. We have a flight to catch. Paris is beautiful this time of year. No! Wait! Julian screamed, standing up, pressing his face against the glass. Don't leave me here, Claire. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Claire stood up. She placed her hand on the glass directly over Julian's palm. For a second, he thought she was reaching out to him. Then she pulled her hand away, wiping it on her coat, as if she had touched something filthy. Goodbye, Julian. She turned and walked out. Silas followed, not even glancing back. Julian stood there screaming into the dead phone line, watching the heavy steel door close on the only people who had ever truly loved him. The lock clicked shut, with a sound of finality that echoed in his ears for the next 20 years. The quiet after the storm. The sun was setting over the Atlantic as the private jet climbed into the sky. Claire sat by the window looking down at the shrinking world below. Somewhere down there in a concrete grid was the man who had ruined her life. But as the plane broke through the clouds into the golden light of the upper atmosphere, she felt the weight lift from her chest. Silas sat across from her reading a newspaper. He lowered it and looked at his daughter. Are you okay? He asked. Claire took a deep breath. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small locket. Inside was a picture of Toby smiling, missing a front tooth. She closed the locket and held it tight. I miss him, Dad, she whispered. Every minute. I know, Silas said gently. We always will. But, Claire said, looking out at the endless horizon, I finally feel like I can breathe again. Julian is gone. The noise is gone. Yes, Silas agreed. The books are balanced. Claire smiled a genuine, soft smile that reached her eyes for the first time in months. She looked at the clouds, painting them with the imagination of a mother speaking to her child. Did you see that, Toby? She whispered to the glass. We got him. You can sleep now. The jet banked toward the east, flying away from the darkness and into the starlight. And that is the end of Julian Thorne. A man who had it all, wealth, power, and a loving family, and traded it for a moment of pleasure and a lifetime of regret. Silas Sterling proved that you don't need violence to destroy a man. You just need the truth, a good forensic accountant, and the patience of a predator. Julian will spend the next 2 decades staring at a gray wall, remembering the sound of a phone ringing that he refused to answer. Now, I have to ask you, was this justice? Some people say that living with the guilt is worse than death, while others think Julian got off easy with a prison cell. What would you have done if you were in Silas's shoes? Would you have taken the legal route or something darker? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read through them, and I'm really curious to see where you stand on this kind of revenge. If this story moved you, or if you just love seeing karma do its work, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Share this video with a friend who needs a crazy story, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you're the first to hear our next saga. Thanks for watching, listening. Stay safe. Keep your phone on for the ones you love, and I'll see you in the next one. The silence in the mahogany-paneled library was heavy enough to crush bones. There were 6 people in the room. 3 billionaires, 2 high-powered attorneys, and Sarah, a single mother, wearing a thrift store raincoat, who had just parked her rusted sedan between a Ferrari and a Bentley. The Sterling family looked at her like she was dirt on their expensive rugs. They thought she was the maid. They thought she was a mistake. But when Mr. Thorne, the executor of the estate, cracked the wax seal on Arthur Sterling's last will and testament, he didn't look at the crying children. He looked straight at Sarah. And what he read next didn't just change her life. It destroyed theirs. Sarah Jenkins stared at the envelope sitting on her cracked laminate kitchen counter. It looked alien against the backdrop of her small, chaotic apartment in East Detroit. The paper was thick, cream-colored, and heavy with the name Harrison Thorne-esque, embossed in gold leaf in the upper left corner. Outside, the November rain was hammering against the window pane, a relentless gray rhythm that matched Sarah's life lately. She was 29, tired and broke. Not just can't afford a vacation broke, but choosing between heating and groceries broke. Her 6-year-old son Leo was coughing in the next room, a lingering chest cold that she couldn't afford to take another day off work to manage. She wiped her hands on her apron. She had just finished a double shift at the Greasy Spoon, a diner on 8th Street, where the tips were low and the customers were demanding. Her feet throbbed. Probably a bill collector dressed up in fancy clothes, she muttered to herself, picking up a serrated knife to slit the envelope open. She pulled out the letter. Dear Ms. Jenkins, it is with great solemnity that I inform you of the passing of Mr. Arthur Sterling on the 14th of November. As per the instructions left in his last will and testament, your presence is formally requested at the reading of the will to take place at the Sterling Estate in Grosse Pointe Shores this coming Friday at 2:00 p.m. Your attendance is mandatory regarding specific bequests. Sarah dropped the letter. It fluttered to the linoleum floor. Arthur. She didn't know an Arthur Sterling. She knew an Artie. Artie was the old man who came into the diner every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 6:00 a.m. sharp. He always sat in booth 4, the one with the rip in the red vinyl seat. He wore a fraying gray cardigan, scuffed loafers, and read the newspaper with a magnifying glass. He ordered the same thing every time, oatmeal with sliced bananas and black coffee. Sarah was the only waitress who didn't rush him. The other girls, especially Brenda, would roll their eyes when Artie walked in. Great, Brenda would say. Here comes the squatter. He takes up a table for 2 hours and tips $2. But Sarah liked him. She saw the loneliness in his eyes, a specific kind of hollow sadness that she recognized in her own mirror. She would refill his coffee without asking. She would ask him about the crossword puzzles. Once when Leo was sick and Sarah was crying in the break room, Artie had seen her red eyes. He hadn't offered money, but he had listened. He told her stories about his own children, speaking of them with a strange mixture of pride and bitterness. He told her he was a retired history teacher living on a fixed pension. Artie died, she whispered, a lump forming in her throat. She felt a genuine pang of grief. He was one of the few gentle constants in her harsh world. But why was she invited to the will reading, and why was the address in Grosse Pointe Shores one of the wealthiest zip codes in Michigan? She looked at the name again. Arthur Sterling. She grabbed her phone. The screen cracked in the corner and typed the name into Google. The result hit her like a physical blow. Arthur Sterling, CEO and founder of Sterling Industries, dead at 84. The tycoon, worth an estimated $4.2 billion, leaves behind a manufacturing empire and 3 children. The photo on the news article showed a younger, sharper version of Artie. He was wearing a tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne. But the eyes, those sad, intelligent blue eyes, were unmistakably the same. He lied, she breathed, sinking into a kitchen chair. He wasn't a teacher. He was a billionaire. The realization made her dizzy. Why would a billionaire eat dollar-menu oatmeal in a rundown diner twice a week for 3 years? And more importantly, why did he want the waitress who served it to be present when his empire was divided? The anxiety set in immediately. She had nothing to wear. Her car, a 2008 Honda Civic with a muffler held on by wire, might not even make the drive. But the letter said mandatory. She looked at the door to Leo's room. She had $40 in her bank account until payday next Friday. If Artie Mr. Sterling had left her even $500, it would be a lifeline. It would mean antibiotics for Leo and the heating bill paid. "I have to go," she told the empty kitchen. The drive to Grosse Pointe Shores was a journey between two different worlds. As Sarah drove past the city limits, the potholed roads smoothed out into pristine blacktop. The crumbling brick row houses were replaced by manicured hedges and wrought iron gates. It was pouring rain. Her windshield wipers were fighting a losing battle, screeching against the glass. When she arrived at the address, she almost drove past the gate. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress. A massive stone structure that looked more like a European embassy than a home. Security guards in yellow rain slickers stopped her at the gate. "Delivery is around the back," the guard shouted over the rain, not even looking at her ID. "I'm here for the reading," Sarah yelled back, rolling down her window. The interior of her car immediately got soaked. "Sarah Jenkins." The guard paused, checking a clipboard. He frowned, looked at her rusted Honda, then back at the list. He pressed a button on his radio. "Clear her. She's on the list." The gate groaned open. Sarah drove up the winding driveway, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Parked in the circular driveway were 3 cars, a silver Porsche, a black Mercedes G-Wagon, and a red Ferrari. Sarah parked her Honda off to the side, hoping the leaking oil wouldn't stain the cobblestones. She took a deep breath, smoothed down her black skirt, the one she wore for funerals and job interviews, and opened the door. She opened her umbrella, but a gust of wind immediately inverted it, snapping the metal ribs. "Great," she muttered, tossing the broken umbrella into the back seat. She made a run for those massive oak double doors, shielding her hair with her purse. The door was opened before she could knock by a butler, who looked like he had been carved out of granite. "Ms. Jenkins," he said. Not a question. "Mr. Thorne is expecting you in the library." He took her soaking wet coat with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated waste. Sarah walked into the foyer. The ceilings were 30 feet high. A chandelier the size of her car hung above a marble floor so polished she could see her reflection in it. She felt small, dirty, and incredibly out of place. The butler led her down a long hallway lined with oil paintings of stern-looking men. He opened a set of heavy doors. "Ms. Jenkins," the butler announced. The conversation in the room stopped instantly. It was a library smelling of old paper leather and money. A fire crackled in a massive limestone hearth. Seated on plush leather Chesterfield sofas were 3 people who looked like they had stepped out of a fashion magazine. On the left was a man in his 40s wearing a suit that cost more than Sarah made in a year. This was Richard Sterling, the eldest son. He had Artie's nose, but none of his kindness. He was swirling a glass of scotch, looking bored. Next to him was a woman with ice-blonde hair and diamonds glittering at her throat. Victoria Sterling. She was checking her phone, her legs crossed elegantly. Standing by the fireplace was the youngest Lucas Sterling. He looked hungover, wearing designer jeans and a blazer staring into the fire. And behind the massive desk at the end of the room sat Harrison Thorne, the lawyer. He was a man in his 60s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't look up when Sarah entered. "Who is this?" Richard asked, his voice dripping with disdain. He didn't stand up. Did the catering staff get lost? I'm Sarah, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Sarah Jenkins. Victoria looked up from her phone, her eyes scanning Sarah from her wet hair to her scuffed, payless heels. She let out a short, cruel laugh. Oh God, is this one of Dad's charities or a senile moment? Please have a seat, Ms. Jenkins, Mr. Thorne said finally, looking up. His voice was calm, authoritative. He gestured to a solitary wooden chair set slightly apart from the sofas. Wait a minute, Harrison, Richard snapped. You can't be serious. We're about to discuss the future of a $4 billion company. Why is this person here? Did Dad owe her for a cleaning service? Ms. Jenkins is a named beneficiary in the will, Mr. Thorne said simply. She stays. The room went silent again, but this time the silence was sharp. A beneficiary. Lucas turned from the fire, his eyes narrowing. Who did she sleep with, you? That's enough, Lucas, Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave. Your father's instructions were explicit. All beneficiaries must be present, or the will remains sealed, and the assets go into a blind trust for the state. Do you want to donate your inheritance to the government? Richard clenched his jaw. He took a swig of his scotch. Fine, let her sit. Let's get this over with so we can pay her off and kick her out. Sarah walked to the wooden chair. She could feel their eyes on her, judgmental, hateful. She felt a flush of shame creep up her neck. She wanted to run. She wanted to be back in the diner wiping down tables. But she thought of Leo. She thought of the overdue rent. She sat down, keeping her back straight, clutching her cheap handbag in her lap. Excellent, Mr. Thorne said. He adjusted his glasses and opened the thick leather folder on the desk. We are here to execute the last will and testament of Arthur James Sterling. As you know, your father was a man of specific principles. He was a stubborn old mule, Victoria muttered. He was a visionary, Thorne corrected, his eyes flashing. And he saw things clearly, especially at the end. Thorne cleared his throat. I will begin with the minor bequests. Sarah's heart pounded. Minor bequests. That's where she would be. Maybe $1,000. Maybe $5. To the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Thorne read, I leave my collection of 17th century naval weaponry. Useless junk, Richard scoffed. To my loyal driver Benson, Thorne continued, I leave the 1965 Shelby Cobra and a stipend of $500,000. Sarah's eyes widened. $500,000 for the driver. The numbers were staggering. To my housekeeper Maria, I leave the Florida condo and $250,000. The siblings didn't blink. These numbers were pennies to them. They were waiting for the real meat, the company, the portfolio, the real estate empire. And now, Thorne said, pausing to take a sip of water, to the personal bequests regarding family and associates. He turned the page. The sound of the paper turning was like a gunshot in the quiet room. To my eldest son Richard, Thorne read. Richard straightened up, buttoning his jacket. Finally. Richard, you always wanted to be the king. You ruthlessly maneuvered to get onto the board of directors, and you pushed for my retirement 5 years early. Thorne read the words in a neutral tone, but the words themselves were venomous. You love power, but you do not understand leadership. I leave you the property in the Hamptons, and my collection of vintage cufflinks. You are hereby removed from the board of directors of Sterling Industries, effective immediately. Richard froze. The glass of scotch slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. What? Richard whispered. He can't do that. I run the company." "Not anymore," Thorne said. "The shares have been reallocated. You are out." Victoria gasped. "Oh my God." "To my daughter Victoria," Thorne continued, not giving Richard time to scream. "You have always treated people as accessories. You value beauty over character. I leave you the Paris apartment and a trust fund that will pay out $50,000 a year provided you pass a random drug test annually." "50,000!" Victoria shrieked, standing up. "That doesn't even cover my stylist and a drug test. This is humiliating. I'll contest this." "To my youngest, Lucas," Thorne said. Lucas looked pale. Don't do this. Lucas, you have never worked a day in your life. You have lived off my accounts and wasted your potential. I leave you nothing." The room went deathly silent. "Nothing," Lucas choked out. "Correction," Thorne said. "I leave you a fully paid tuition to the University of Michigan should you choose to enroll. If you graduate, you will receive a stipend. Until then, you are cut off." The three siblings were on their feet now, shouting over each other. "He was insane!" Richard yelled, his face purple. "He was senile. I'll burn this place to the ground." "Harrison, you manipulated him!" Victoria screamed. "Silence!" Thorne slammed his hand on the desk. The sound echoed like a thunderclap. "I am the executor. This will is ironclad. There are video recordings of his mental state attached to the document. You will not win." The siblings fell into a seething, panting silence. They looked like cornered animals. "If you have nothing," Richard hissed, pointing a shaking finger at the lawyer, "then who gets it? Who gets the company? Who gets the billions?" Thorne didn't answer Richard. Instead, he slowly turned his head. He looked directly at Sarah. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She gripped the arms of the wooden chair so hard her knuckles turned white. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible." Richard followed the lawyer's gaze. He looked at the woman in the wet skirt. The woman he had thought was the maid. "Her," Richard laughed, a sound bordering on madness. "The waitress, you've got to be kidding me. This is a joke." "Ms. Sarah Jenkins," Thorne read from the will, his voice softening for the first time. "You were the only person in the last 5 years who asked me how my day was and actually waited for the answer. You fed a lonely old man when he didn't have his wallet. You showed me kindness when I offered you nothing but conversation." Sarah was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. "Therefore," Thorne read, "I leave the remainder of my estate, including the controlling stake in Sterling Industries, the Grosse Pointe Manor, and the entirety of my investment portfolio, to Sarah Jenkins." The room didn't just freeze. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the universe. Richard stared at Sarah. His eyes weren't just angry anymore. They were dangerous. "You," Richard took a step toward her. "You stole my life." Richard Sterling's expensive Italian leather shoes crunched on the broken glass of his Scotch glass as he lunged toward Sarah. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You manipulated him!" Richard roared, his hands reaching out as if to strangle her. "You poured him coffee and batted your eyelashes and tricked a senile old man out of his legacy." Sarah flinched, raising her arms to protect her face, bracing for a blow that never came. 2 massive security guards materialized from the shadows of the library. One of them, a man with a neck as thick as a tree stump, intercepted Richard mid-stride. He didn't tackle the billionaire. He simply placed a hand on Richard's chest and shoved. Richard stumbled back, crashing into the heavy oak desk. "Mr. Sterling," Harrison Thorne said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a razor blade, "I would strongly advise against assaulting the new owner of this property. That would be a felony. And since you no longer have the Sterling legal team at your disposal, you would likely await trial in a public holding cell. Richard straightened his jacket, breathing heavily. His eyes darted around the room looking for an ally. He found none. Lucas was staring at the floor, looking sick. Victoria was pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "This isn't over," Richard spat, pointing a trembling finger at Sarah. "This is fraud, undue influence. I will bury you in so many lawsuits your grandchildren will be born bankrupt." "I don't want it," Sarah stammered, finally finding her voice. She stood up, her legs shaking so badly she had to lean on the chair. She looked at the lawyer. "Mr. Thorne, please. I don't want their money. I don't want the company. I just came because I thought Artie left me a keepsake. Please just give it to them. I want to go home to my son." Victoria's eyes lit up. She stepped forward, her demeanor instantly shifting from shock to predatory sweetness. She walked over to Sarah, ignoring the smell of damp thrift store clothes, and placed a manicured hand on Sarah's arm. "See," Victoria said, looking at Thorne. "She doesn't want it. She's clearly overwhelmed. It's a mistake. Harrison, draw up a waiver. Sarah can sign the rights back to us, and we will give her a generous finder's fee. Say $50,000, Sarah. That's a lot of money for someone like you. You could buy a new car." Sarah looked at Victoria. $50,000. It was life-changing. She could fix the car, pay off her debts, maybe move to a safer apartment. Sarah started. "Ms. Jenkins," Thorne interrupted, his tone sharp. "Before you make any decisions, there is a second part of Arthur's instructions. A video message. He anticipated this exact reaction." Thorne pressed a button on a remote. A large panel on the library wall slid back to reveal a flat-screen TV. The screen flickered to life. There was Artie. He was sitting in this very chair, wearing his favorite gray cardigan, the one with the coffee stain on the sleeve that Sarah had tried to sponge out for him once. He looked frail, but his eyes were sharp. "Hello, Sarah," the video Artie said. Sarah covered her mouth to stifle a sob. Seeing him alive speaking to her broke her heart all over again. "If you are watching this," Artie continued, leaning into the camera, "it means I'm gone, and it means my children are currently in the room, likely screaming, threatening you, or trying to buy you off with pennies." On screen, Artie chuckled dryly. In the room, Richard and Victoria looked like they had been slapped. "They think I'm senile," Artie said, his voice hardening. "I am not. I am heartbroken. I built Sterling Industries to build the future to help people. But my children, they see it only as a piggy bank." Richard fired 4,000 workers last year to boost the stock price by 2 points so he could buy a yacht. Victoria uses the company charity fund to host galas where she is the star. Lucas just doesn't care. Artie sighed, looking down at his hands. "Sarah, I watched you for 3 years. I watched you work double shifts on a sprained ankle because you couldn't let your team down. I watched you give your sandwich to a homeless man outside the diner when you hadn't eaten all day. You have the one thing my children lack: empathy. You know what it means to struggle. You know the value of $1 and, more importantly, the value of a human being." He looked straight into the lens. "I am not giving you this money to make you rich, Sarah. I am giving you a burden. I am giving you the CEO position. But there is a condition, the golden handcuffs clause." Thorne paused the video. "The clause is simple, Ms. Jenkins. You cannot sell the company. You cannot liquidate the assets. You cannot transfer the shares to the children. You must serve as the acting CEO of Sterling Industries for exactly 1 year. You must attend the board meetings. You must make the decisions." "I can't run a billion-dollar company," Sarah cried. "I'm a waitress. I have a high school diploma." "My father knew that," Thorne said. He unpaused the video. You will be scared, Artie said on the screen. You will think you are not qualified, but I have surrounded you with a team of advisors who are loyal to me, not my family. Listen to them. Trust your gut. If after 1 year you still don't want it, you can sell, but you have to try. Do it for the employees, Sarah. Do it for the thousands of families whose livelihoods depend on a leader who actually cares. The screen went black. Thorne took off his glasses. If you refuse the inheritance, or if you try to hand it over to the children before the year is up, the entire estate, every cent, every building, every patent will be liquidated and donated to the Save the Cats Foundation. The children get nothing. You get nothing. Richard looked like he was going to vomit. He booby-trapped the will. He protected his legacy, Thorne corrected. He looked at Sarah. So, Ms. Jenkins, will you accept the job, or do you want to walk away and let the company be dissolved? Sarah looked at Richard, whose eyes were burning with hatred. She looked at Victoria, who was looking at her like she was a cockroach. Then she thought of the 4,000 workers Artie mentioned. People like her dad, who had lost his factory job and never recovered. People who lived paycheck to paycheck. If the company dissolved, they would all lose their jobs. She thought of Leo. This wasn't just money. This was protection. This was a future where he could go to college. Sarah stood up straighter. She wiped the tears from her cheeks. "I'll do it," she whispered. Then louder, "I'll do it, for Artie." "This is insanity," Richard screamed. "She's a waitress. She'll ruin the stock in a week." "Then you better hope she learns fast," Thorne said coldly. "Because your trust funds are tied to the company performance now, Richard. If she fails, you starve." Thorne handed Sarah a heavy set of keys and a black American Express card. "The car outside the G-Wagon is yours. The driver is waiting. I suggest you go to your apartment, pack your things, and move into the estate tonight. It is not safe for you in East Detroit anymore." "Not safe?" Sarah asked. "You are now the wealthiest woman in Michigan," Thorne said, "and you have 3 very angry enemies." He glanced at the siblings. "Also, there is one final clause, the safety clause, if Miss Jenkins were to meet an untimely demise, an accident, a sudden illness, a car crash. The police are instructed to investigate it as a homicide immediately, and the entirety of the Sterling assets will bypass the family and go directly to the federal government." Thorne smiled thinly at Richard. "So if I were you, Richard, I would hire bodyguards to make sure she doesn't even stub her toe. Because if she dies, you lose everything forever." Richard's face went gray. He couldn't kill her. He couldn't hurt her. He was trapped. Sarah took the keys. The metal felt cold and heavy in her hand. She turned to leave. "See you at the office, Richard," she said. It was the first time she had addressed him directly. She walked out of the library, her heels clicking on the hardwood. But as soon as the heavy doors closed behind her, the adrenaline crashed. She slumped against the wall in the hallway, clutching her chest, gasping for air. She had just declared war on a shark tank, and she didn't even know how to swim. The transition was not smooth. It was a violent dislocation of reality. Within 2 hours of leaving the Sterling estate, Sarah's identity had been leaked. As she pulled the massive, unfamiliar Mercedes G-Wagon up to her crumbling apartment complex in East Detroit, she saw them. News vans. Dozens of them. Reporters were swarming her front stoop like ants on a dropped lollipop. Flashing lights illuminated the graffiti on the brick walls. Neighbors were leaning out of windows pointing. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, locking the doors. Her phone, which she had forgotten to silence, began to buzz incessantly. Unknown numbers. text messages from people she hadn't spoken to in high school. "Hey girl, heard the news? We should catch up." She couldn't go in there. She couldn't get Leo. She called the number Thorne had given her. "Mr. Thorne," she panicked. "I can't get to my son. The press is everywhere." "We anticipated this." Thorne's calm voice came through the car speakers. "Look to your left." Sarah looked. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing a large man with an earpiece. "That is Head of Security, Mr. Franks," Thorne said. "He has already extracted Leo from the babysitter's house through the back alley. He is safe. Follow Mr. Franks to the Plaza Hotel. We have booked the penthouse floor for the interim, until the estate is prepared for your arrival." Sarah felt a wave of dizziness. They had taken her son. It was efficient, yes, but terrifying. She was losing control of her own life. 3 days later, Sarah stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master suite of the Plaza Hotel. She was wearing a navy blue power suit that a stylist hired by Thorne had brought over. It cost $3,000. It fit perfectly, shielding her fragile confidence like armor. Today was the first board meeting. "You look like a boss, Mom," Leo said. He was jumping on the massive king-sized bed, eating room service pancakes. He didn't understand the billions. He just knew Mom wasn't working at the diner anymore, and there was a pool downstairs. "Thanks, baby," Sarah said, forcing a smile. She felt like she was going to throw up. There was a knock at the door. It was Thorne. "The car is ready, Ms. Jenkins. Are you prepared?" "No," Sarah said honestly. "I don't know anything about manufacturing Harrison. I don't know what EBT Day means. I don't know how to read a P&L statement." "You don't need to know those things yet," Thorne said, handing her a leather folio. "You just need to know people. Richard will try to humiliate you today. He has called an emergency meeting with the intention of proving you are incompetent. He wants a vote of no confidence to strip you of operational power even if you own the shares. Can he do that? He can try. He has the board in his pocket, especially a man named Marcus Vane. Vane is the CFO. He's a snake. Watch him." The Sterling Industries headquarters was a glass monolith in downtown Detroit. Sarah walked into the boardroom surrounded by a phalanx of lawyers. The room was intimidating, a 50-foot table made of polished obsidian surrounded by 20 men and women in gray suits. Richard sat at the head of the table. When Sarah entered, he didn't stand. He smiled a cold, shark-like grin. "Ah, the Cinderella story arrives," Richard announced. "Everyone meet Sarah. I believe the last thing she managed was a section of 4 tables at a diner. Please, Sarah, take a seat. We were just discussing the Q4 supply chain logistics for the semiconductor division in Taiwan." Sarah sat at the opposite end of the table. She felt small. "Actually," said a man with slicked back hair, Marcus Vane, the CFO. "I have a question for the new CEO. Sarah, regarding the lithium shortage, do you believe we should pivot our procurement strategy to the Bolivian mines, or should we hedge our bets with the Australian futures market, given the current geopolitical climate, of course?" The room went silent. They were all staring at her, smirking. It was a trap. A question designed to expose her ignorance. If she guessed, she'd look stupid. If she said nothing, she'd look weak. Sarah looked at Vane. She looked at his expensive watch, his nervous tapping of a pen the way he wouldn't meet her eyes directly. She remembered Artie talking about Vane once. Vane is smart, but he's a gambler. He likes high stakes even when it's not his money. Sarah took a deep breath. She didn't look at the papers Thorne had given her. She looked at Vane. "I don't know the answer to that, Marcus," Sarah said clearly. Richard chuckled. "Well, there you have it. She admits it." "But," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength, "I do know that Artie, Mr." Sterling stopped buying from the Bolivian mines 3 years ago because of labor violations. He told me it was blood money. So if we are discussing Bolivia, it means someone in this room restarted those negotiations behind his back while he was dying. Sarah leaned forward. Was that you, Marcus? The smirk vanished from Vane's face. The room went deadly quiet. Well, the margins were, Vane stammered. So you prioritized margins over the founder's explicit moral directive? Sarah asked. She didn't sound like a waitress anymore. She sounded like a mother catching a child in a lie. Mr. Thorne, please make a note. I want a full audit of the procurement division. If we are buying from mines that use child labor, we stop today. She looked around the table. I may not know futures markets yet, but I know right from wrong. And as long as I am CEO, this company will not profit from misery. Does anyone else have a trick question? No one spoke. Richard looked furious. He had expected her to crumble. Instead, she had just asserted moral authority. The meeting ended an hour later. Sarah had survived. But the victory was short-lived. When the limo dropped her back at the Plaza Hotel that evening, exhausted but proud, she found someone waiting in the lobby. He was wearing a leather jacket and leaning against the concierge desk, charming the receptionist. He looked handsome in a rugged, messy way. Sarah froze. It was Mark, Leo's father, the man who had walked out on her 6 years ago when she told him she was pregnant, the man who had never paid a dime of child support, the man who had blocked her number. He turned and saw her. His face lit up with a grin that used to make her knees weak, but now made her stomach turn. "Sarah, baby," Mark called out, walking toward her with open arms, ignoring the security guards. "I saw the news. My God, look at you. You look expensive." Sarah stepped back. "What are you doing here, Mark?" "What do you mean?" Mark laughed. "I'm here for my family. I'm here for you and... What's his name, Leo? I missed you guys. I realized I made a mistake." He reached for her hand. "We're rich now, baby. We can finally be a family." Sarah pulled her hand away. She saw the greed in his eyes. It was the same look Richard had. "You don't care about us," Sarah hissed. "You care about the money." "Don't be like that," Mark said, his voice dropping low, a hint of menace creeping in. "I have rights, you know. Parental rights. If you don't want to share, well, I might just have to go to the press. Tell them how the new billionaire CEO is keeping a father away from his son. How would that look for your moral image?" Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Richard. Richard must have found him. This wasn't a coincidence. Richard had dug up her past and weaponized it. "Security," Sarah said, her voice trembling. Mr. Franks stepped forward. "Is there a problem, Ms. Jenkins?" "Remove him," Sarah said, staring Mark in the eye. "And if he comes back, call the police." "You can't do this," Mark yelled, as Franks dragged him toward the revolving doors. "I'm his father, I'll sue you. You hear me? I'll take half." As Mark was thrown out onto the street, Sarah watched him go. She realized with a sinking heart that the board meeting was the easy part. The real war had just begun, and now they were coming for her son. The morning sun didn't bring light. It brought exposure. 2 days after Mark was thrown out of the Plaza Hotel, Sarah sat in the back of the armored Mercedes, staring at an iPad screen. Her hands were trembling. She was watching The Morning Hour, the most popular talk show in the country. Sitting on the plush beige couch looking like a repentant saint in a crisp button-down shirt was Mark. "I just want to see my son," Mark said to the host, wiping away a fake tear. "I made mistakes when I was young. I was scared. But I've been trying to get back in Leo's life for years, and now that Sarah has all this money, she thinks she can buy me out of existence. She thinks she's better than everyone. She has security guards throwing me into the street like I'm trash." The host leaned in sympathetically. "So you believe she is using her newfound billionaire status to alienate a father from his child?" "Absolutely." Mark nodded vigorously. "It's classic alienation. She's changed. The money changed her. She's not the sweet girl I knew. She's a corporate shark now. I'm just a guy who drives a delivery truck. I can't fight her lawyers. I'm begging the public, help me see my boy." Sarah threw the iPad onto the leather seat. "He's lying. He blocked me. He changed his number 3 times to avoid paying $50 a month for diapers." Mr. Franks, sitting in the front passenger seat, glanced back. "The narrative is already setting, Ms. Jenkins. The poor father versus the billionaire witch. It plays well in the tabloids. Richard Sterling's PR firm is undoubtedly paying for his hotel and his suit." The car pulled up to the Sterling Industries Tower. Unlike the first day, there were protesters. A small group of people holding signs that read, "Give the dad a chance," and "Money can't buy love." "Ignore them," Franks said, opening her door and using his body as a shield against the camera flashes. When Sarah got to the executive floor, the atmosphere was suffocating. The secretaries stopped typing when she walked by. The junior executives whispered near the water cooler. They weren't looking at her with respect anymore. They were looking at her with disgust. Richard had successfully poisoned the well. She made it to her office, Artie's old office, and slammed the door. She collapsed into the massive leather chair, burying her face in her hands. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I'm losing. They hate me." Knock, knock. The door creaked open. Sarah looked up, expecting Thorne or Vane. It was Lucas Sterling. The youngest brother looked different. He wasn't wearing his usual hungover expression or designer streetwear. He was wearing a simple hoodie and jeans, and he was holding a backpack. "What do you want, Lucas?" Sarah asked, wiping her eyes. "Here to tell me I'm a monster too." Lucas walked in and closed the door. He looked uncomfortable. "No, I actually came to pick up my tuition check. Thorne said I had to get it signed by you personally." Sarah sighed. She opened the drawer where the checkbook lay. "Right. The University of Michigan. What are you studying?" "Social work," Lucas mumbled. Sarah paused, pen hovering over the paper. "Social work, I thought you were a party boy." "I am," Lucas said, sitting on the edge of the desk. "Or I was. But Dad knew. He knew I hated the business. I hated the suits. I hated Richard screaming. I always wanted to help people, but I was too busy spending money to numb myself. Dad cutting me off? It was the kick in the teeth I needed." He looked at Sarah, his expression serious. "Look, I'm not here to be your friend. You took my inheritance. But I'm not Richard. I don't want to destroy you. Your brother hired my ex to humiliate me on national TV," Sarah said bitterly. "I know," Lucas said. "And it's going to get worse. That's why I'm here. I heard Richard and Victoria talking at the estate last night." Sarah straightened up. "Talking about what? Richard is liquidating his personal assets. His cars, his watch collection, his crypto. He's raising cash. A lot of it. Fast." "Why?" Sarah asked. "He has trust funds." "Thorne froze the trusts because the stock dipped after Mark's interview," Lucas explained. "Richard is cash poor. If he's selling his Ferraris, it means he's funding something off the books, something illegal. He's desperate, Sarah. And Victoria, she's talking to the board members' wives. She's spreading rumors that you're mentally unstable, that the pressure is making you crack." Lucas took the check Sarah handed him. "Watch your back, Sarah. Richard thinks if you resign before the year is up, the Save the Cats clause is voided because he can prove you were incompetent. He thinks he can get a judge to overturn the will if you quit under distress." I'm not quitting, Sarah said, her voice hardening. Good, Lucas said, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. Because honestly, you're the first person to sit in that chair who hasn't tried to scream at me. Lucas left. Sarah stared at the door. An ally. A small one, but an ally nonetheless. An hour later, Thorne entered. He looked grim. We have a problem, Ms. Jenkins. Is it Mark? It is. He has filed an emergency motion for full custody of Leo. He claims your current living situation, the high-profile threats, the media circus, is an unsafe environment for a child. He is petitioning the court to remove Leo from your care immediately. He can't do that, Sarah screamed, standing up. He's a stranger to Leo. He is the biological father, Thorne said calmly. And he has a very expensive lawyer, one that Richard is undoubtedly paying for. The hearing is in 3 days. If we lose, Leo goes to live with Mark. Sarah felt a cold terror grip her heart. If Leo went to Mark, Richard would control him. They would use her son as a hostage to force her to sign over the company. What do we do? Sarah asked. We fight, Thorne said. But we need ammunition. We need to prove Mark is unfit, and we need to stabilize the company. The stock is down 12% because of the scandal. The board is calling for your resignation to save the brand. You need a win, Sarah. A business win, and you need it now. Sarah looked out the window at the Detroit skyline. She didn't know how to manipulate stocks. She didn't know how to manipulate the media, but she knew people. Thorne, she said, turning around. Cancel my meetings, get the car. Where are we going, the courthouse? No, Sarah said. We're going to the factory, the main manufacturing plant on the west side. Ms. Jenkins, I advise against that. The union is furious. There are rumors of a strike. It's hostile territory. I'm a waitress, Thorne, Sarah said, grabbing her coat. I know how to deal with angry people who haven't been fed what they were promised. I'm going to talk to the workers. The Sterling Industries manufacturing plant was a sleeping beast, silent and angry. When Sarah stepped out of the black SUV, stripping off her blazer to reveal a simple hoodie, the workers stared. They held strike signs. Big Mike, a foreman with arms like tree trunks, blocked her path. Come to sell us out, Mike spat. Sarah didn't flinch. I came to see why the number 4 press is down. She pushed past him, not to the office, but to the factory floor. For 2 hours, Sarah crawled under machinery with the mechanics. She found the truth fast. The maintenance logs showed Marcus Vane had slashed the safety budget by 40% to boost margins. But worse, the broken seal on the press had fresh tool marks. It wasn't an accident, Sarah told Thorne, wiping grease from her cheek. It was sabotage. Suddenly, a metallic screech echoed from the catwalks high above. A massive crate of scrap metal suspended by a crane plummeted. Move! Mike roared. He tackled Sarah onto the concrete just as the crate smashed exactly where she had been standing. The impact cracked the floor, sending a cloud of concrete dust and shrapnel into the air. If Mike hadn't moved her, she would have been flattened. Thorne was shaking. The safety clause, he whispered. If you die, the assets go to the government. Someone is trying to trigger the clause just to burn it all down. Up in the crane cab, the operator was gone. But on the floor of the cab, Franks found a gold lighter engraved with initials MV. Sarah didn't go home to change. She marched into the Sterling Tower lobby covered in grease dust and blood from a scrape on her cheek. She took the private elevator to the 50th floor and kicked open the boardroom doors. Richard and Vane were laughing at the head of the table. They froze. Sarah walked forward and slammed a heavy grease-covered wrench onto the polished obsidian table. It cracked the surface. Marcus Vane, she said, her voice deadly calm. She tossed the gold lighter onto the table. You dropped this in the crane cab. Vane's face went white. I lost that weeks ago. You planted it. So you admit you were up there, Sarah countered. Richard told me to. Vane screamed, leaping up as police officers called by Thorne entered the room. He said if we broke the machines, the stock would drop and he could buy back in. He didn't say anything about dropping a crate on her. The room gasped. Richard stood up, trembling. He's lying. I never said that. Get him out of here, Sarah told the police. As Vane was dragged out in handcuffs, Sarah turned slowly to Richard. Get out, she whispered. If I see you near my factories or my son again, I will spend every penny of this fortune to bury you. Richard fled the room like a coward. Sarah sat at the head of the table, dirty and exhausted, looking at the terrified board members. Now, she said, let's fix the safety budget. The Wayne County family court was suffocating. Mark sat across the aisle wearing a sharp suit undoubtedly paid for by Richard, feigning tears as he testified. He painted Sarah as an unstable, power-hungry billionaire whose dangerous lifestyle made her unfit to raise Leo. Judge Holloway, a stern traditionalist, seemed swayed, peering over his spectacles with disapproval. Ms. Jenkins, the judge warned, the court is inclined to grant temporary custody to the father. Sarah stood up, ignoring Thorne's hand on her arm. Your Honor, Mark isn't here for a son. He's here for a transaction. She slid a single document across the table. This is a bank statement from the Cayman Islands. It shows a $2 million deposit made yesterday. The source is a shell company registered to Richard Sterling. Mark's face crumbled from smugness to panic. The courtroom went silent. He sold his son, Sarah said, her voice shaking with rage. It's a bribe. It was a loan, Mark screamed, cracking under the pressure. Richard promised me it was untraceable. He said he owned this court. The admission rang out like a gunshot. Judge Holloway slammed his gavel, his face purple with fury. He ordered Mark detained immediately for extortion and perjury, stripping him of all parental rights. As bailiffs dragged a screaming Mark away, Sarah finally exhaled. She had won. 1 year later, the Sterling Industries boardroom was unrecognizable. The atmosphere was light, the obsidian table replaced by warm oak. Sarah sat at the head, listening as the new CFO announced record profits and an all-time high in employee satisfaction. Richard was serving 5 years for corporate espionage. Vane had turned state's witness. Lucas was now running the charitable foundation, finally happy. As the meeting adjourned, Sarah looked at a framed photo of Artie on her desk. We did it, she whispered. Her phone buzzed a text from Leo asking for pizza to celebrate an A in math. Sarah smiled, grabbing her keys. She wasn't just a CEO. She was a mom who had walked through fire for her family. And for the first time, the sky was clear. This story reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or stock options, but in character. Arthur Sterling saw something in Sarah that his own children lacked humanity. In a world obsessed with status, Sarah proved that empathy is the strongest leadership trait of all. The greedy like Richard Vane and Mark consumed themselves, while the giver rose to the top. It's a powerful lesson. Never underestimate the person serving your coffee, and never mistake kindness for weakness. Sometimes the quietest people in the room are the ones holding all the power. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you do if you were left a billion-dollar empire? Would you keep it or sell it? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching.